When 42-year-old Federal Judge Mariam Washington walked into Courtroom 3B at the Federal District Court that Tuesday morning, she had no idea that being in her own courtroom would lead to the most humiliating experience of her 15-year judicial career. The bailiff took one look at the black woman in the judge's chamber and immediately assumed she was cleaning staff, loudly demanding that she finish her work and leave before the real judge arrived. What happened next would be captured on courtroom cameras and viewed by millions, because the woman they were trying to remove wasn't just any courthouse employee. She was the presiding federal judge who was about to hold court in session, and when she revealed her true identity, the entire legal system would witness what happens when you disrespect someone with the power to hold you in contempt of court. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Federal District Court building as lawyers, clerks, and court personnel prepared for another day of legal proceedings. It was 8:30 a.m., and Courtroom 3B was being prepared for a high-profile federal case that would determine the fate of a major corporate lawsuit. Among those arriving early was 42-year-old Federal Judge Mariam Washington, one of the youngest federal judges ever appointed to the bench. Mariam wore a conservative navy blue suit and carried a leather briefcase, looking like any attorney arriving for court proceedings. But inside that briefcase were case files and legal documents that she would need to review before presiding over today's trial. What the courthouse staff didn't immediately recognize was that this was their judge, the woman who would be making legal decisions that could set precedent for years to come. Mariam had earned her position through extraordinary academic achievement and legal expertise. Harvard Law School graduate, magna cum laude, Columbia University Masters in Constitutional Law, 15 years of distinguished service as a federal prosecutor before being appointed to the federal bench. She had tried high-profile cases, argued before appellate courts, and earned the respect of colleagues throughout the legal community. As Mariam entered her assigned courtroom to review case materials before the session began, she was approached by Bailiff Robert Sullivan, a 20-year veteran of court security who had developed what he considered keen instincts about who belonged in federal courtrooms and who did. "Hey, you there," Sullivan called out, his voice echoing through the formal courtroom. "Are you here to clean? You need to finish your work and get out before the judge arrives." Mariam looked up from her briefcase, where she'd been organizing legal documents for the morning's proceeding. The assumption hit her like a physical blow, but she maintained her professional composure. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Mariam asked, giving Sullivan the opportunity to correct his mistake. "I said you need to finish cleaning and leave," Sullivan replied, his voice growing louder and more authoritative. "This is a federal courtroom, and we have important proceedings today. The judge will be here soon, and we can't have cleaning staff wandering around." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Mariam had faced skepticism about her qualifications throughout her career, but never had someone so brazenly assumed she was janitorial staff simply because of her race and gender. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Mariam said calmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd developed through years of managing courtrooms. "I'm not cleaning staff," Sullivan laughed dismissively. "Right. And I suppose you're a lawyer." "Look, lady, I've been working in this courthouse for 20 years, and I know who belongs here and who doesn't. Black women in this building are either cleaning staff or maybe court reporters if we're lucky. You're definitely not a lawyer, and you're sure as hell not the judge." The casual racism of Sullivan's statement was breathtaking. He had just reduced Mariam's entire professional identity to stereotypes based solely on her race and gender, dismissing the possibility that she could hold any position of authority in the legal system. "Actually," Mariam said, her voice taking on the tone she used when addressing unruly attorneys in her courtroom, "I am the judge. I'm Federal Judge Mariam Washington, and this is my courtroom." Sullivan's expression shifted from authority to confusion to outright disbelief. "No way. You're making that up. Federal judges don't look like you. They're older white men in robes. You're just some cleaning lady trying to cause trouble." By now, other court personnel had begun to take notice of the confrontation. Court clerk Jennifer Hayes, court reporter Michael Chen, and security officer Patricia Lopez had all entered the courtroom and were witnessing what was clearly an unprecedented situation. "Ma'am," Jennifer Hayes interjected, approaching the conversation with obvious skepticism. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have a very important federal trial today, and only authorized personnel are allowed in this courtroom." "I am authorized personnel," Mariam replied firmly. "I'm Federal Judge Washington. Check your court schedule. I'm presiding over United States versus Meridian Corporation today at 9 on URA." The claim seemed so impossible to the court staff that they couldn't process it. A young black woman claiming to be a federal judge. It contradicted every assumption they had about what judges looked like and who held power in the federal court system. "Look," Sullivan said, his voice taking on a threatening edge, "I don't know what kind of scam you're running or how you found out about today's case, but you need to leave immediately, or I'm calling federal security." What Sullivan didn't understand was that he was threatening to call security on someone who had the authority to hold him in contempt of court, fine him, and potentially have him arrested for interfering with federal judicial proceedings. "Sir," Mariam said, reaching into her briefcase, "I'm going to show you my judicial credentials, and then I want you to think very carefully about how you'd like to proceed." "I don't want to see any fake IDs or forged documents," Sullivan replied dismissively. "I've seen it all before. People trying to scam their way into federal facilities with phony credentials," but Mariam was already retrieving her Federal Judicial Commission from her briefcase. The official document, signed by the President of the United States and sealed with the federal court system's official seal, clearly identified her as a duly appointed federal judge with full authority to preside over federal court proceedings. "This is my Judicial Commission," Mariam said, holding the document where Sullivan could see it clearly. It was signed by the President and confirmed by the United States Senate. "I am Federal Judge Mariam Washington, and you are currently interfering with my ability to prepare for court proceedings." Sullivan examined the document with the same skepticism he might show to a clearly forged $20 bill. "This has got to be fake. There's no way you're a real federal judge. Where did you get this made?" "Some online printing shop." The accusation was so outrageous that even the other court personnel began to look uncomfortable. Federal judicial commissions were not documents that could be easily forged, and the suggestion that someone would attempt such a serious federal crime was extraordinary. "Mr. Sullivan," Mariam said, her voice now carrying the full authority of her judicial position, "you are currently committing contempt of court by interfering with federal judicial proceedings. I strongly suggest you verify my identity through proper channels before you dig yourself deeper into legal trouble." But Sullivan was too invested in his assumptions to back down. "I'm calling this in," he announced, reaching for his radio. "We have someone in courtroom 3B, claiming to be a federal judge. She's got forged documents and is refusing to leave federal property." The radio call went out to courthouse security, and within minutes, additional security personnel were heading toward courtroom. What they were about to witness would become legendary within the federal court system. Chief Security Officer David Rodriguez arrived first, followed by 2 additional guards. Rodriguez had been working in federal courthouses for 15 years and had never encountered a situation quite like this. "What seems to be the problem here?" Rodriguez asked, looking between Sullivan, Mariam, and the gathered court personnel. "We've got someone claiming to be a federal judge," Sullivan explained, gesturing toward Mariam. "She's got fake credentials and is refusing to leave the courtroom. I think she might be planning to disrupt today's proceedings." Rodriguez turned to Mariam, and she could see him making the same assumptions that Sullivan had made. Young black woman in a courtroom? Obviously not the judge. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," Rodriguez said, moving toward Mariam with the clear intention of escorting her from the building. "Chief Rodriguez," Mariam said, reading his name tag, "before you make a career-ending mistake, I suggest you call the Administrative Office of the United States Courts and verify my identity. I am Federal Judge Mariam Washington, confirmed by the United States Senate and duly appointed to this bench." The specificity of Mariam's suggestion gave Rodriguez pause. Someone attempting to impersonate a federal judge probably wouldn't suggest that security call the administrative office to verify credentials. "You're saying you're actually a federal judge?" Rodriguez asked, his tone shifting from authority to uncertainty. "I'm not saying it," Mariam replied calmly. "I am a federal judge, and right now You and your staff are preventing me from preparing for a federal trial that begins in 20 minutes. Rodriguez looked at the judicial commission that Mariam was still holding, and for the first time he began to examine it with the attention it deserved. The official seals, the presidential signature, the Senate confirmation details, these were not things that could be easily faked. Sullivan, Rodriguez said slowly, have you actually verified this woman's identity? I don't need to verify anything, Sullivan replied stubbornly. I can see what she is. She's not a federal judge. Federal judges are old white men, not young black women. The racist nature of Sullivan's statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone in the courtroom could hear exactly what he was saying, that black women couldn't be federal judges, that judicial authority was reserved for white men, and that appearance was more important than credential. But now we need to pause because what happened next would not only change how Mariam was treated in this courthouse, it would lead to a complete transformation of court security procedures and sensitivity training, because Rodriguez was beginning to realize that they might have just made the biggest mistake in courthouse security history. Ma'am, Rodriguez said, his voice much more respectful, would you be willing to wait while I make a phone call to verify your credentials? Of course, Mariam replied, but I would suggest you make that call quickly. I have a federal trial beginning at 9:01 a.m., and there are lawyers, defendants, and media waiting for proceedings to begin. Rodriguez stepped away from the group and made a call to courthouse administration. The conversation was brief, but Mariam could see his expression changing from skepticism to shock, to what appeared to be panic. Rodriguez ended his call and turned to address not just Sullivan and the gathered court personnel, but the growing crowd of attorneys, clerks, and visitors who had been drawn by the unprecedented nature of what was unfolding. The courtroom lobby had become an impromptu arena where justice and discrimination were being weighed in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood the gravity of federal law enforcement. What you've witnessed here today is not just a misunderstanding or a simple mistake. This is systemic discrimination in action, and it's happening in a federal courthouse, the very place where justice is supposed to be blind. Defense attorney Sarah Mitchell stepped forward from the crowd that had gathered. Your Honor, she said, addressing Judge Washington directly with the respect due to her position, I've appeared before you dozens of times over the past 3 years, and I want everyone here to know that you are one of the most respected and knowledgeable judges in this district. Your legal scholarship is impeccable, and your courtroom management is exemplary. What happened here today is not just wrong, it's unconscionable. Prosecutor James Thompson nodded vigorously in agreement. Judge Washington has presided over some of the most complex federal cases in recent years, including high-profile corporate fraud trials and constitutional challenges. Her decisions are consistently upheld on appeal, and her legal reasoning is cited by other courts. This discrimination is an attack on the integrity of our entire judicial system. The crowd began to murmur in support, with several people expressing shock and outrage that such blatant discrimination had occurred in a federal facility dedicated to upholding the law. Court reporter Michael Chen pulled out his phone and began recording, knowing that this moment would need to be documented for posterity and potential legal proceedings. When Rodriguez returned to the group, his face was pale and his demeanor had shifted completely. Ma'am, I've just confirmed your identity with court administration. You are indeed Federal Judge Washington, and I want to apologize on behalf of courthouse security for this misunderstanding. The word misunderstanding seemed inadequate to describe what had just happened, but Rodriguez was clearly trying to minimize what he now realized was a serious incident. Actually, Mariam said, her voice taking on the judicial tone that attorneys throughout the district had learned to respect. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling and gender discrimination by courthouse personnel who made assumptions about my qualifications based solely on my appearance. Sullivan, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, finally began to understand that he had made a catastrophic error. Judge Washington, I didn't know. I was just doing my job. Your job, Mariam replied firmly, is to provide security for federal judicial proceedings, not to determine who looks like a judge based on racial and gender stereotypes. By now, attorneys were beginning to arrive for the 9:00 a.m. trial, and they were witnessing the arduous sight of courthouse security apologizing to their judge. Word was beginning to spread throughout the courthouse that something extraordinary was happening in courtroom. Jennifer Hayes, who had been standing quietly throughout this exchange, stepped forward. "Your Honor, I want to apologize for my part in this incident. I should have checked the court schedule before making assumptions." "Hayes," Judge Washington replied, "checking the court schedule should have been your first response, not your last resort. What if this had been an attorney you didn't recognize? Would you have demanded that they leave without verifying their credentials?" The question highlighted the systemic nature of what had happened. This wasn't just about one security guard making a mistake. It was about institutional assumptions about who belonged in positions of authority and who didn't. Defense attorneys Sarah Mitchell and prosecutor James Thompson had arrived for the trial and were watching this exchange with fascination and horror. They had both appeared before Judge Washington multiple times and had enormous respect for her legal expertise in courtroom management. "Your Honor," Attorney Mitchell said, approaching carefully, "is everything all right? We're here for the Meridian Corporation trial." Judge Washington turned to address the attorneys, and her demeanor shifted back to the professional judicial authority they recognized. "Counselors, we'll begin proceedings shortly. I was just addressing a security matter that has now been resolved." But as more people gathered in the courtroom, it became clear that this incident would have far-reaching consequences beyond just today's trial. Chief Rodriguez was already on his radio calling for his supervisor and courthouse administration. This was the kind of incident that would require immediate investigation and likely disciplinary action. Judge Washington took her position at the bench, putting on her judicial robe with the same dignity and authority she brought to every proceeding. The transformation was striking, from cleaning staff presumption to federal judicial authority in a matter of minutes. "Before we begin today's proceedings," Judge Washington announced to the assembled courtroom, "I want to address what just occurred. Court personnel made assumptions about my identity based on my race and gender, rather than checking proper credentials or court schedule." The courtroom was completely silent as Judge Washington continued. "This incident highlights the importance of treating every person who enters this courthouse with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance or your assumptions about who they might be." Sullivan, still standing in the courtroom, was visibly shaking as he realized the full implications of what he had done. He had not only discriminated against a federal judge, but had done so in open court, in front of attorneys, and with court recording equipment capturing every word. "Miss Sullivan," Judge Washington said, addressing him directly, "you will remain available for administrative review of this incident. Chief Rodriguez, please ensure that courthouse administration has a complete report of what occurred here today." The trial proceeded normally, with Judge Washington demonstrating the legal expertise and courtroom management skills that had earned her appointment to the federal bench. But the video of the morning's incident would soon spread throughout the legal community and beyond. Within hours, legal news websites were reporting on the unprecedented incident of courthouse security attempting to remove a federal judge from her own courtroom. The story sparked nationwide conversations about bias in the legal system and assumptions about judicial authority. Sullivan was suspended pending investigation and ultimately terminated from his position. The incident led to mandatory bias training for all courthouse personnel and new procedures for verifying credentials of unfamiliar individuals in federal facilities. Judge Washington received formal apologies from the Chief Judge of the District and the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, but perhaps more importantly, her handling of the situation became a case study in maintaining dignity under pressure and using judicial authority to address systemic discrimination. The attorneys who witnessed the incident began sharing the story with colleagues, and Judge Washington's reputation for fairness and professionalism was enhanced rather than damaged by how she handled the discrimination she faced. 6 months later, Judge Washington would speak at a national conference on diversity in the federal judiciary, using her experience to educate other court personnel about the importance of treating every person with respect regardless of appearance or assumption. The Meridian Corporation trial that followed the incident was conducted with Judge Washington's typical attention to legal procedure and constitutional rights. Her judicial decisions in the case were later upheld on appeal, demonstrating that the morning's discrimination had not affected her ability to provide fair and impartial justice. Sullivan, meanwhile, struggled to find employment in court security after his termination. The incident had made him unemployable in the federal court system, and his case became a cautionary tale about the consequences of racial profiling and gender discrimination. Chief Rodriguez implemented comprehensive changes to security procedures and became an advocate for diversity training throughout the federal court system. His quick action to verify Judge Washington's credentials and apologize for the incident helped prevent an even more serious breach of judicial protocol. The incident lasted less than 30 minutes, but its impact on courthouse culture and security procedures would be felt for years to come. It was a reminder that respect for judicial authority must be based on position and credentials, not on appearances or stereotypes. Judge Washington continued her distinguished service on the federal bench, but she carried with her the knowledge that even in the highest levels of the justice system, discrimination and bias could still occur. Her response to that discrimination became a model for how to address injustice with dignity and authority. The courthouse returned to its normal operations, but the lesson of that morning echoed through the federal court system for years to come. Everyone learned that federal judges come in all forms, and that true judicial authority is earned through education, experience, and appointment, not through meeting someone's stereotypes about what a judge should look like. If this story moved you, remember that discrimination can happen anywhere, even in the institutions designed to ensure justice. Subscribe for more stories of courage and dignity, and share this reminder that real authority comes from qualifications and character, not from appearance or assumption.